Okay, good evening, everyone. And I'm so happy that you're here with us tonight. And I'm looking forward to sharing Alfred Stieglitz and Georgia O'Keeffe with you. I want to start by thanking Ellen for inviting me, and also Margaret, who's been very supportive, and I'm sure she'll continue to be supportive throughout this. So I've been doing Alfred Stieglitz and Georgia O'Keeffe for a few years, and they're really one of the few couples that nobody really is more prominent than they in 20th century American culture. She became his second wife in 1924. She was in many ways his opposite. She was born and raised in Wisconsin. She studied in Chicago. She studied in Virginia. She studied in New York, and she taught in Virginia, Texas, and South Carolina before meeting Stieglitz in his gallery in 1916. They had an instant attraction, and it led to a 40-year relationship. So what you're seeing on your screen obviously is a photograph of Alfred, a picture of the two of them, and a wonderful painting of a photograph of Georgia titled Hands. And that's from 1918. So it's one of his early pictures of her. And the fact that he focuses on her hands is interesting, and we'll see how that develops as we go through. So he was born, and so he was born in 1864, and he had a 50-year career and included being the editor of two significant journals, Camera Notes and Camera Works. He operated 4 exhibition spaces in New York City. He was born in Hoboken, New Jersey, and he was the first son of German Jewish immigrants. His father's name was Edward, and his mom's name is Hedwig. At the time, his father was a lieutenant in the Union Army, 1864, our Civil War. But after 3 years of fighting and earning an officer's salary, he was able to buy an exemption from future fighting. That allowed him to stay near home and during his first son's childhood, and he played a very active role making sure he was well educated. Now, over the next 7 years, the Stieglitzes had 5 more children. And I'm going to outline them. For one thing, you'll be seeing some pictures, but it's a little deeper than that. So Flora was born in 1865, just a year later. And then there were twins. And the twins were Julius and Leopold, born in 1867. Then there was Agnes in 69 and Selma in 71. Now, Alfred Stieglitz was said to have been very jealous of the relationship and the closeness of the twins. And as a result, he spent much of his youth wishing that he had a soulmate like his brothers had. 1871, Stieglitz is sent to the Charlier Institute. At that point, it was the best private school in New York. But during the fetid, non-air-conditioned summers, what they did was they went, like many upper-class families, George in the Adirondack Mountains. And as an adult, as you know, Stieglitz would return there frequently to the same area. Now, he and his father considered the classes at the high school.
That's no big loss.
Someone needs to mute themselves.
It's ringing. It's probably something that's on the board that I didn't see because I was in a room actually doing something.
Okay, we need to.
Can you hit Alt-M, please?
I forgot, you have everything transferred over to your phone.
Exactly.
So that's not like your wife calling, that's like the clerk calling.
Yeah, that's like results waiting. That's
Okay, so you can hear me. Okay. So both he and his father considered the classes at the high school far too easy to challenge him. So Stieglitz decided that the only way he would get a proper pre-college education was to enroll him in the rigorous schools of his German homeland. 1881, Edward Stieglitz sells his company. It was a clothing company at that point, and he sells it for $400,000. Now that at that point was a tremendous amount of money. He moves his family to Europe for the next several years. And he enrolls his son, Alfred, in the middle school there in the southern west part of Germany. The next year, Alfred was sent to a mechanical engineering school at a technical school in Berlin. His dad gave him this tremendous allowance of $1,200 a month. Now, even today, that would be a lot of money. That was a huge amount of money. And he spent most of his time going around the city in search of the same kind of intellectual discussions he had enjoyed back home here in the United States. By chance, he enrolled in a chemistry class, and the chemistry class was taught by a fellow whose last name was Vogel. He was an important scientist and a researcher in chemistry, and then in the developing field of photography. And in Vogel, Stieglitz found both an academic challenge that he needed and an outlet for his growing artistic and cultural interests. At the same time, his parents in 1884 decided to return to America. So they leave 20-year-old Alfred in Germany, and he remained there for the rest of the decade. What he started to do was collect books, art books. I'm letting somebody in. So the first books that he would not only collect them, but he would read them. You know, sometimes we have this pile of coffee table books that are filled with wonderful information, but getting to read them is another task. This was the beginning of a very large library of photography and photographers in Europe and the US that he would collect. He read extensively what he collected, and he formulated his initial thinking about photography as an art form. Very, very important to Alfred. He really was a key figure in this movement of thinking of photography as an art form. So 1887, he writes his first article, and it's titled A Word or Two About Amateur Photography in Germany. And it's for the new magazine, The Amateur Photographer. Up until that point, you didn't need a magazine like that. Soon he was regularly writing articles on the technical and aesthetic aspects of photography for magazines in England and in Germany. That same year, he submitted several photographs to the annual holiday competition held by somebody wrote in that there was no other picture. Trust me, they're coming when it's there. I wanted to introduce them one by one, but I don't want you to be concerned. So soon he was regularly writing articles on the technical and aesthetic aspects of photography for magazines in England and in Germany. And he submitted several photographs to the annual holiday competition that was held by the British magazine Amateur Photographer. And this first one was for the November 25th, 1887 issue. It's titled The Last Joke, Bellagio, and I'm going to enlarge it for you so you can see it up close. It was considered the only spontaneous work in the competition. The photographs obviously is of children laughing and talking as they gather around this woman who looks like she's collecting water at the well. And it's really closely cropped. You're right in close to the children, and you can see all of their wonderful expressions. This little guy here, the position of this young woman, and the smiles here. He's actually captured it. It's an example of a genre scene akin to those painted by the accomplished fine artists at the time. You know, in the 1880s, by 1884, the Impressionists have had a number of exhibitions. You're starting into Seurat with the post-impressionism, and so capturing the moment, capturing what's going on outside, all of the things that were so important to the Impressionists, the light, the atmosphere, he's captured in the photographs. And now I promise we'll get over to Sunlight and Shadows. So this was the next year's picture. He won both first and second prizes in the same competition, and his reputation spread as several German and British photographic magazines began publishing his work. So this is titled Sunlight and Shadows, Paula. So we know who it is. And what I find interesting is you have the Venetian blinds that are casting the shadow here as she's writing at the table. Now, in 1890, his sister Flora died. She was giving birth. His parents called all of the family home to deal with the tragedy. First, Alfred didn't want to go. He was very happy back in where he was working. He now thinks the city is uncultured and he doesn't want to go back to New York. But his father threatened to what? Cut off his allowance. So he reluctantly came back to New York City. By that time, he's considered himself an artist with a camera, and he refused to sell his photographs or seek employment doing anything else. His father, who always was doting on his firstborn son, helped him to buy out a small photography business where he could indulge his interests and perhaps even make a living on his own. But he demanded, Alfred, such high quality of the production, and he paid his employees such a high wages that the photochrome engraving company rarely made a profit. During that time, though, he befriended the editor of the American Amateur Photography magazine, and he was soon writing regularly for that journal. He continued to win awards for his photographs at exhibitions, and including a very highly important exhibition, a joint exhibition of the Boston Camera Club, the Photographic Society of Philadelphia, and the Society of Amateur Photographers of New York. So they collaborated, and he was respected. Important turning point, in late 1892, he bought his first handheld camera. Now, how does that make a difference? It was a Fulmer and Schwing, and it was 4 inches by 5 inch plate. So he then no longer had to carry along a tripod, and the camera he had been using had an 8 by 10 plate. This makes life so much easier for him, and he can set it up and take these pictures in many different places. So he's invigorated with the freedom of doing that, and he takes pictures like Winter Fifth Avenue and the terminal. And I'm going to get you up closer to them so you can see the texture that he's able to get for us, so we can feel this atmosphere of this wagon coming down the street in the snowstorm. And here, I think of this when I think of the horses in Central Park with the steam coming off of those horses. You see the broom and the workers and the buildings, and you certainly feel that you could be right there with that carriage with the horses pulling it. Spring of 1893, he's offered a job as the co-editor of the American Amateur Photographer, and he accepts that. It was published, by the way, that magazine from 1889 to 1906, but he doesn't want it to appear that he's biased in his opinions. And because Photochrome is now printing the photogravures for the magazine, Stieglitz refuses to draw a salary. So he goes to work for him. From then on, he wrote most of his articles and reviews for the magazine, and he got an enthusiastic response. Now we have 5 points. So we've all heard of 5 points, even movies made about 5 points, but this shows us so much. His photographs take us and show us the culture, the streets, the way the street, you can see the trolley car tracks, but you also can see the clothing, the style. This was Feinberg's East Side store in the notorious 5 Points area. And what Stieglitz said was, during this period from 1893 to 95, I often walked the streets of New York downtown near the East River, taking my hand camera with me. I wandered around the Tombs, the old post office, 5 Points. I loathed the dirty streets, but I was fascinated. I wanted to photograph everything. So if you're a young man and you have parents that are concerned about you, what they want him to do at this point is settle down and get married. For several years, he had known Emmeline Obermeyer. She was the sister of a close friend of his friend's name is Joe. On the 16th of November, 1893, when Emmeline turned 20 and Stieglitz was 29, they married in New York City. Stieglitz later wrote that he did not love Emmy, as she was known, when they were first married, and that their marriage was not consummated for at least a year. He indicated that the marriage was one of financial advantage for him. She had inherited money from her father, a wealthy brewery owner, and his father had lost a great deal of money in the stock market. So he immediately regretted his brash decision to marry, and he found out that Emmy could not begin to match his artistic and cultural interests. One of his biographers, a fellow named Richard Whalen, summed up their relationship by saying that Stieglitz, quote, resented her bitterly for not becoming his twin. So that's a recurring kind of theme. Early 1894, he takes his wife on a delayed honeymoon to Europe, and they travel around France, Italy, Switzerland, and of course, Stieglitz photographed extensively on the trip. And we get Wet Day on the Boulevard in Paris. Again, the atmosphere, the people with their umbrellas. Let's get in a little closer. The reason I hesitated is I want to show you a comparative painting. So you can see the gloss from the wetness on, and we'll see more of this. He's very good at taking photographs that pick up on the slickness and the atmosphere of the trees. And that's what you can see here. But what I wanted to do was compare it with this, which is Gustav Kaibat's Rainy Day, Paris Street Rainy Day from 1877. It's at the Art Institute of Chicago. And Kaibat also picks up on the streets, in this case, the cobblestones and the atmosphere of it. They traveled to Venice, and we have here a bit of Venice. And I know there's another title. Give me a sec, okay? Bit of Venice was photographed in the early summer of 1894, published in New York several times in the next decade. When he came back to New York, he creates this photogravure from the negative, and it appeared in camera notes and in his book, Picturesque Bits of New York and Other Images. And it's got really a very careful composition. You're really looking at just picture where your camera would be, and you would be in a boat looking straight down and capturing not only the glare of the reflection in the water and the boats, but also all the way out to the building and the bridge in the distance. So this is one of my favorite photographs because this is on the Seine near Paris, and this is 1894. Now I always think of the Seine as this beautiful river, and I see Monet in his bateau atelier going down and making paintings. Here we have the goats who are also enjoying the Seine, and I just think it wonderful to capture that. This picture on the Seine is owned by MoMA, by the way. I don't know that it's on display, but it's owned by them. So then he gets these, he goes to the Netherlands, and he pictures these ladies. So we have scurrying home, and you can see how they're going. You can feel the wind, and they're near the water, and this person to the right is holding her arms together to.
Why is this pulling the shit out of you?
And they're moving over toward this church here. And then this is the two ladies here. This is the gossips. And I love first of all, look at how close the boat is. So it must be up onto the sand. It's an interesting connection there. It's cropped, so you don't really know. But you do know that they're talking very animatedly to one another. They have their hands on their hips, and you can imagine who they're talking about, because that's definitely what's going on there. And the letterbox with these two delightful young ladies putting the envelope in. So, again, that's 1894. One of the highlights of 1894 was Stieglitz's introduction to a new photographer, Edward Steichen, at the first Chicago Photographic Salon. Steichen was originally a painter, and he brought many of his painterly instincts to photography. So the combination of the two art forms was perfect in Stieglitz's mind, and the two became inseparable friends and colleagues. And what Stieglitz would do, and it was almost a cycle, he would work very, very hard on a number of,
Listen, we could watch TV.
I'm sorry, there's somebody that's not, let me try this muting again. Okay. So what he would do is be involved in a number of projects at one time, and he would exhaust himself. And then he would have to rest, and then it would start all over again. So there's a cycle. So he does this at this point, and he's recuperating. He's corresponding with a photographer whose name is Eva Watson Schutz. And she encouraged him to use his influence to put together an exhibition that would be judged solely by photographers, not by people. We usually have our jury of judges if they were used to judging oil paintings, and then they saw the photographs. Sometimes their reaction was not what the photographers preferred. So Stieglitz began looking for a location to hold such an exhibit. And in December of 1901, he was invited by Charles Decay of the National Arts Club to put together an exhibition which Stieglitz would have full power to follow his own inclinations. He assembled a collection of prints from a close circle of friends, and in homage to the Munich photographers, he called it the photo secession. This is that picturesque bits of New York that I mentioned. That's the cover. He opened at the Arts Club in early March of 1902, and it was an immediate success. He had achieved his dream of putting together an exhibition judged by the photographers, and there was great critical acclaim. He resigns from Camera Notes, waits a month, starts a new journal titled Camera Work. First issue was only printed 4 months later in December of 1902. And like all of the subsequent issues, it contained beautiful hand-pulled photographs, critical writings on photography, aesthetics and art, and reviews and commentaries. So what you're seeing here is A Dreary Day, and that one's from 1897. Again, he's captured the atmosphere of the street, the horses, the street lights. I went to a stage of taking photographs of street lights. It's terrific. So we have Reflections, New York, and an icy night. And of course, what you're getting is that atmosphere. So you get the glimmer of the lights on the wet pavement, the street light, the lights right along here, and even out to the atmosphere there. And this alley of trees, this is an icy night in 1898. And he takes us through the alley. Of course, there's one row of footprints, perhaps hoofprints here, and out to the atmosphere. Now, this is his daughter, Kitty, and Kitty was born in 1898. She's lived until 1971, and we're going to hear a little bit more about Kitty. I wanted to show you the picture because this is about the time that she's born. This is the Hand of Man. Now, this is the Long Island City train yards. And it's funny because this photograph is from 1902. It was printed in 1910. We're still talking about what to do with those train yards and how to make use of them now in the 21st century. So I'm sure Alfred would be impressed that his photograph lives on in this way. So it's a lone locomotive chugging through the train yards in Long Island City, and he shows the gritty urban landscape and that it had this atmospheric beauty and symbolic value, and it still does. So the title alludes to the modern transformation, the hand of man in this landscape. Let's get out of here. And so a couple things in between. November 25th, 1905, the little galleries of the photo secession opened with 100 prints by 39 photographers. The gallery became an instant success, and work by his friend Steichen accounted for more than half of the sales. Emmy, his wife, who had never given up thinking that she would one day earn Stieglitz's love, continued giving him an allowance from her inheritance in spite of his ongoing neglect. Her support allowed him to work without having to be overly concerned about financial matters. And through the combination of his jobs, he became even more a relentless advocate of photography as an independent art form. Now, who's this young lady? 2 months later, this Pamela Coleman Smith comes into the little galleries and she asks Stieglitz to look at some of her drawings in watercolors. And these are 2 examples. They're titled, she has long titles for her pictures. The top one is Second Series Duet Sonata in F Major for Violin and Piano Mozart. And the lower one is untitled, but subtitled Sea Creatures. But I just wanted to give you some example of what she did. So she's really an important, also, again, another turning point, because she's nicknamed Pixie. And you could see why she would be nicknamed Pixie. She's better known for her tarot cards. So she's illustrated the Waite Smith deck of divinatory tarot cards for Arthur Edward Waite. And there's no record of a relationship between her and Alfred Stieglitz, but it was her, he was enthralled with her exotic appearance and her unusual art. And what he decides to do is show her work because he thought it would be highly instructive to compare drawings and photographs in order to judge photography's possibilities and limitations. So by including her, the success of her show marked a turning point. The old era of Stieglitz, where as a revolutionary promoter of photography, and the new era of Stieglitz as a revolutionary promoter of modern art. So then so she really changed things for him. Now, probably this is one of his most iconic pictures. June 1907, he decides he and his family are going to sail to Europe to visit some friends and relatives. They book passage on the SS Kaiser Wilhelm II, one of the largest and fastest ships in the world at the time. Now, Emmy was interested in first-class accommodations, and that's what they had. They had a fine stateroom on the upper decks. But according to Stieglitz, one day he decides about the 3rd day of travel that he's going to take a walk around the ship. And he comes across a viewpoint that looked down on what he calls the lower class passengers area known as steerage. He takes his camera and he aims it. He captures the scene that as we said, is iconic. So what you see is the people, here's someone with a prayer shawl. This fellow here with his white suspenders is always eye-catching. The boom here, this bridge, he said he never saw anybody walk across this bridge through the whole trip. And then you have the people here looking down with the hats and holding the baby and all different folks. So that's the steerage from 1907. When he arrived in Paris, he developed the image in a borrowed darkroom, and he carried the glass plate around him through Europe for 4 months. By the time he returned to New York, he was so caught up in other business that he put it aside. He didn't publish it until 4 years later. So it's really considered one of his iconic pictures. Now, what he was doing at that point was interspersing exhibitions of what he knew would be controversial art, like Rodin's sexually explicit drawings, with what Steichen called understandable art, and then photographs. So the intention was to set up a dialogue that would enable the visitors to see and discuss and ponder the differences and similarities between artists of all ranks and types, between painters and draftsmen and photographers and sculptors. So the National Arts Club mounted a special exhibition of contemporary art. So who would be in contemporary art at that point? You had Stieglitz and Steichen, Casabier, and White, along with paintings by Mary Cassatt, William Glackens, Robert Henry, James McNeill Whistler, and others. So they're brought together, which was what Alfred wanted. So let's get old and new New York. So what he's done here on the left is, this is a changing Park Avenue South. And this picture is at the Metropolitan, by the way. Park Avenue here is still lined with these freestanding mansions and townhouses, but under construction is the Vanderbilt Hotel, which would have been between East 33rd and 34th Streets. And this is a window. Now this one, so let's date them because the dating is important. This one is 1910 and this one is 1932. This is from my window at an American Place. And he's captivated by what are kind of abstract forms, the skyscrapers that are populating the modern city, and all of these cracks in the building that remind us of the natural process of aging. So he's captured that in those photographs. Now, the Armory Show. What a life-changing experience in art for our New Yorkers. And people that came to see it. It opened on February 17th in 1913. In late 1912, painters Walter Pack, Arthur B. Davies, and Walter Kahn started to organize this great show of modern art. And Davies asked Stieglitz to help. Now, Stieglitz didn't like Walter Kahn, so he declined to become involved, but he agreed to both lend a few modern art pieces from his place, which at that point was 291, to the show. He also agreed to be listed as an honorary vice president of the exhibition. Now, who else is an honorary vice president? Claude Monet, Odilon Redon, Mabel Dodge, and Isabella Stewart Gardner. So he certainly was in good company. In February 1913, the show opens. And soon modern art was the major topic of discussion throughout the city. The irony of this for me is that this show initially was intended to showcase American art. And when some of the pieces were brought back from Europe by some of the folks that we just mentioned, all of a sudden the focus became on this modern art. So some of our American artists kind of took second place with the whole thing. So what you have, So what you have here is Standing Female Nude by Pablo Picasso. You have Head of a Woman. Now this woman is Fernande Olivier. She was his romance at that point. She's the one that he would take to Gertrude Stein's house and her salons. In fact, Fernande is the one who taught Alice B. Toklas a little bit of French. So we have a head, I'll get closer to it. He shared the organizers, Alfred Stieglitz shared the organizers' enthusiasm for promoting modern art in America, and he lends work. So let's look at some of these other pictures. You know, this is Nude Descending the Staircase by Marcel Duchamp. And we have this one, which this is one that by Wassily Kandinsky. It's called Improvisation 27. The subtitle is Garden of Love 2. Alfred Stieglitz bought that. Now, by buying that, what he did was he put his stamp of approval on this type of art. He was important enough to do that. So of all of the pictures, this one has prominence for that reason. And he wrote to Kandinsky and he described the rationale behind his purchase. He said, I really had no moral right, nor even the money to buy your picture. But he was incensed by those who failed to recognize the work's importance, and he decided to buy it. So very, very important. And this is from his 291 studios. This is just a cover. I just wanted to slip it in there. So the Armory Show, and what he did was he had shows of his own at the same time so people could partake of the art scene in New York in many different venues. Now, what happens in 1916 in January is he's shown a portfolio of drawings by a young artist. Who's our young artist? Georgia Toto O'Keeffe. And she's born, as you see, in 1887. And you have two photographs of her. One, the left one is her as a teaching assistant to Alan Bement. And she's was his teaching assistant at the University of Virginia in 1915. On the right, you have a 1918 photograph by Alfred Stieglitz, and again, the hands. Now she looks, as an unusual look. I would almost say as though she just got up, but he felt that it was important to capture people, not with one photograph, but with many, because otherwise you don't capture the whole person. So it's an early image, overtones of traditional photographs of women. She confronts the camera directly. The position of her hands kind of protects her body. And we know her as the mother of American modernism. So she's born in a farmhouse on 245 Highway T in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. Her parents were dairy farmers. Her father was of Irish descent. Now, her maternal grandfather was George Victor Toto. That's where she gets this middle name. And he was a Hungarian count who came to America in 1848. Now, Georgia was the second of 7 children and the first daughter. She attends the town hall school, and by the age of 10, she decides to become an artist. She and her sister received art instruction from a local colorist, Sarah Mann. In 1902, the O'Keeffes moved from Wisconsin to a close-knit neighborhood in Peacock Hill in Williamsburg, Virginia. She studied at the Art Institute of Chicago, 1905 to 1906. 1907, she attends the Art Students League here in New York City. She studied under William Merritt Chase, learning the techniques of traditional realist painting. And in 1908, she won the League's William Merritt Chase Award for this painting, which is really striking. So she's young at this point. If she painted it in 1907, she would have been 20 years old, give or take. Her prize was, so it's dead rabbit in a copper pot. You really can feel the fur. It's almost, I mean, it's very sad the rabbit is dead, but you actually could reach out and pet that very soft fur. And she's captured the gleam on the copper pot. So she's certainly excelled, and she wins a scholarship to attend the League's outdoor summer school in Lake George, New York. So while she's in New York City, she attends an exhibition of Rodin's watercolors at Gallery 291. And there's 88 works there shown, and they were visceral, but abstract and spare, shocking to viewers. And Stieglitz was willing to go to be on the edge of these movements with the modern artists, including Rodin and others. So O'Keeffe decides that she's going to abandon the idea of pursuing a career as an artist in the fall of 1908. She said she could never distinguish herself as an artist among all of the people that were mimicking and copying that she saw during her art training. So she takes a job in Chicago as a commercial artist, and she worked there for 2 years. And what she did was very, very tedious. She drew lace and embroidery under the pressure of daily deadlines. And it ended when she contracted measles and she couldn't bear the eye strain. You know how measles affects your eyes sometimes. She doesn't paint for 4 years. She said the smell of turpentine made her sick. She was inspired to paint again in 1912 when she attended a class at that University of Virginia summer school, and she was introduced to Arthur Wesley Dow by Alan Verment. I want to just show you this is the type of work that Arthur Wesley Dow did. He encouraged artists to express themselves using line, color, and shading harmoniously. And I've been known to say more often than people want to hear that I think Georgia O'Keeffe's strength is not in the form, but in the shading. The shading is so amazing in her paintings. So it goes back to this education that she's had. 1912, 1914, she taught in the public schools in Amarillo in Texas. And then she attended Teachers College at Columbia here. She took classes from Dow. So this is his Crater Lake and his view of Lake Louise in Alberta, Canada. Also in 1914, she was able to go to the Art Students League, and she meets 2 young ladies. She meets Anita Politzer and Dorothy True. Dorothy True. So Anita Politzer was a whirlwind of energy, committed to new ideas in art and suffrage for women. And O'Keeffe and Politzer began a correspondence that lasted from 1915 to 1965, for 50 years. Now, Anita provided the enthusiasm, the art news, and the entree into impresario photographer Alfred Stieglitz. This led to her, to Georgia's first gallery exhibition, her first public recognition as an artist. Anita and Dorothy both visited Stieglitz at 291 with O'Keeffe. Now, this is a photograph taken by Alfred of Dorothy True, and what it is a double exposure. And you can see her face in it. You certainly see this eye, her hair, and then it's exposed over this picture of her leg, which is on the frames. There's always the mats for the pictures, the matting and the, so her leg comes down, it's kind of bulging out of this pump, and it captures the angle here. So it's a unique and I guess a classic, iconic kind of photograph. She seems to step down on those overturned prints. So these are some early pictures from Georgia. She served as that training assistant to Bement. She taught at Columbia. Now that's not our Columbia College, that's Columbia College in Columbia, South Carolina in the fall of 1915. And when she was there, she completed these charcoal abstractions and she mails them to Anita Politzer in New York, and Anita shows them to Alfred. So you see, this is drawing 13. This is Blue 2 from 1916. And Paul Strand was a friend of theirs. She met him, as you see, it's a little bit later, but it's an Mandarin portrait that looks like this, but that's Paul Strand. So she's very creative in her work. Further course at Columbia in the spring of 1916, summer teaching with Bement. She takes a job at West Texas State Normal College in 1916 to February of 1918. And she visited Palo Duro Canyon during that time, making its forms the subject of her work. April of 1916, Stieglitz exhibits 10 of her drawings at 291. Now, Georgia knew he had them, and she knew he was going to exhibit them. She just didn't know exactly when. So she's appears to be surprised when she realizes her work is on view, and she confronts him over the drawings. But she says, okay, you could leave them in place. You should only be so lucky to be in Stieglitz's place. But anyway, so Stieglitz organizes her first solo show in April of 1917, and it included oil paintings and watercolors completed in Texas. Now, he was interested in her, physically and artistically, but she didn't immediately return his interest. Soon after, she meets Paul Strand, and she directs her physical attraction to him. She goes back to Texas. Several months, she and Strand write back and forth, increasingly romantic letters. Paul Strand tells Alfred about his new yearning for Georgia, and Stieglitz says, no, I'm infatuated with her. Or actually, he probably says he was in love with her. Strand's interest waned, Stieglitz's escalated, and in summer of 1917, he and O'Keeffe were writing to each other their most private and complicated thoughts. And here's a photograph from around that time. So the year 1917 marked the end of an era in Stieglitz's life and the beginning of another, in part because of changing aesthetics, the changing times brought on by the war, and because of his growing relationship with O'Keeffe, he no longer had interest or the resources to continue what he had been doing in the past decade. He disbanded what was left of the photo secession. He ceased publishing camera work. He closed the doors of 291, and he realizes that his marriage to Emmy is over. He had finally found his twin, and nothing would stand in his way. They corresponded, he and Georgia, frequently. In June of 1918, she accepted his invitation to come up to New York. June 10th, she arrives. She moves into a studio apartment at 114 East 59th Street, which his niece Elizabeth owned, but she wasn't using. the two were deeply in love. And shortly after her arrival, they start to live together. But what happens is his wife catches them. He invites her to his apartment, to their place, because his wife is out shopping. And you know the rest of it. She comes home, she says it's either her or me, and he leaves. So it's not like, no storybook ending there. Their relationship began. First, it was somewhat platonic. Kitty, their daughter was, his daughter, was away at school. Now, Kitty plays an important role in this. He scheduled his daily visits to suit her painting hours. He invites her to that photo session in his apartment. He's told to get out. They get a place of their own. And later in 1918, he takes O'Keeffe up to the family home in Lake George. Now, his family doesn't mind. They didn't really like Emmy. So they're okay in embracing Georgia when she comes up. They spend almost part of every year there until 1929. But Kitty is upset. And so it certainly doesn't help the relationship. So these are some of her paintings from around this point. We have the Pink and Green Mountain, that's number 3. We also have this. Now, the flag, I had shown this picture and then went to an exhibition at the New York Historical Society about World War I and pictures about that. This has much more meaning than I knew. November 1917, she had visited her brother. Her brother's name is Alexis, at a training camp in Waco, Texas. He was about to leave for France. When he was over in France, he experienced gas warfare, and he died of its effects about 10 years after the war. So when she's painting this, she's anticipating him going over to fight. And you also get tree and picket fence. So both this and this have the red, white, and blue motif, so to speak. Let's move on. So this is somewhat new to the exhibition because I didn't know she had done sculpture until I went down. I'm going to show you one other picture of some clothing. There was an exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum, and it included these 2 pieces of sculpture, which I had been unaware of. They're both titled, and you think there's 3, but what they did was make a large sculpture from her sort of smaller sculpture. So they're both titled Abstraction. This one is white lacquered bronze, and this one is 10 inches by 10 inches. It's owned by MoMA, and the other was sold by Christie's. At Christie's, it was sold for $1 million, and this is I hate to miss photographs because they're priceless. So this is she in front of this wonderful and large sculpture, outdoor sculpture. So this is, he loves to do the neck and the hands. Let me just get back to I like to put in the new things I find. Why shouldn't you see what the newest thing is? This is her from 1918 and neck from 1921. I'm just going to put up one more. I love the way that the clothing kind of highlights her. The hat, even the circle, the picture behind. But I want to call your attention to her hands when we get up close. I think the white collar sets off the face too. But let's zoom in and see. So just the whole expression, her eyes, the texture even of her face, and the neck with her fingers. By putting the fingers up, doesn't it change things? It kind of frames out. You have the jawline and then the fingers. And then here, it's almost claw-like, the right hand here. But she's beautiful in that picture. So she begins a series of abstract paintings, simply called Series 1, and then different numbers. I'm just showing you 2 of them. I thought I picked them, they happen to be consecutive, but that's not the reason. Again, I want to show you the shading, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, but it's so outstanding. So each of these was 20 inches by 16 inches, and they're at places around the world. And here she is painting up in Lake George. Well, she's actually probably got her sketch stuff, but she's in the garden there. Now, Stieglitz's mother, Hedwig, died in November of 1922. And as he did with his father, he buried his grief in his work. He spent time with Paul Strand and Strand's new wife, Rebecca, who they call Beck. And he began organizing a new show of O'Keeffe's work. The plums from 1920, don't you feel you could pick up the plums and eat them? And to put them on this cloth that looks almost silver back here, and the reflection is just awesome. And these two I see as stylized. So you have Apple Family 2 and also the Autumn Leaves, and it's a very different style, not natural looking, but I love it when artists try different things, and here she did. So what's this? This is, I want to fill you in a little in between. So 1922, he organizes a large show of John Marin's paintings and etchings at the Anderson Galleries. He's energized by the activity. He begins one of his most creative and unusual undertakings. He photographs a series of cloud studies. Now I'm showing you 3. There were hundreds. He said, I wanted to photograph clouds to find out what I had learned in 40 years about photography. And the key to this is, he said, that everyone could take photographs. You don't need special trees. You don't need faces. You don't need interiors. You don't need special privileges. Clouds were there for everyone. So the title of his series was Music, a sequence of 10 cloud photographs, but he takes photographs across from 1925 to at least 1930, and then there's quite a number that are not dated. These are chronological, and so this is 1925, 29, and 31, and the series is owned by the Metropolitan. Couple of Georges from that point. So we have Lake George and Starlight Night Lake George, and she's big into the reflections. You can see that she's taken the mountains and brought them down to the water and reflected them. And this, of course, always reminds me of Van Gogh's Starry Night. The lights are here, so she's showing us across the water 2 lights and how their reflections bring them back to this shore, and how she's sort of undulated this foreground. And this is where she painted up at Lake George. This is my shanty from 1922. She first was introduced to the Lake George area in 1907, when she was a student, and she had gotten that scholarship. She creates this vocabulary of simplified forms. And the focus here is the window, even though we have the sort of straight and sharp lines of the building, and then it's all softened by the greenery and the hills above it. And these hills, as we see the later pictures, she referred to hills as elephants, and you could see the hump, kind of the back of the elephant as they come down. We'll see it in her Southwest pictures, but I just notice it here also. So here's one of her paintings and one of his photographs, although this is so amazing that it looks like a stylized painting, but it's not, it's a photograph. So this is the Chestnut Gray in 1924. Again, those hills and wonderful lighting behind it. I don't know if you've noticed the cloud formations lately here on Long Island, but they seem to be more unique and changing. And she was able to capture the sky and put it just the way it needed to be in her pictures and his photographs. So I need to catch up on his private life. So 1924, his divorce is finally approved by a judge. And within 4 months, he and Georgia marry. He's 60, she's 37. They moved to an apartment, 35 East 58th Street, and they're married on December 17th, and they're married in Cliffside Park in New Jersey. There's no reception, no honeymoon, small private ceremony at John Marin's house. And afterwards, the couple went back home. O'Keeffe said later they married in order to soothe the troubles of Stieglitz's daughter, Kitty, who was being treated at that point in a sanitarium for depression and hallucinations. During her first summers at Lake George, Georgia O'Keeffe had become an avid gardener, and she really very much wanted to be a mother. Stieglitz avoided the topic, and then a tragedy occurred. His daughter, Kitty, suffers postpartum dementia praecox after childbirth. She was a Smith College graduate, and she, at that point, started to fall into using the language of a 7-year-old. She was institutionalized for the rest of her life. He was never permitted to visit her, but he sent cards and presents on her birthday and holidays. The issue of having a child with Georgia was permanently closed. The marriage didn't seem to have much of an effect on Stieglitz or Georgia. They continued working on their individual projects as they had before. So beginning in 1924, Stieglitz began to battle angina and heart attacks until his death in 1946. He had a fall, he had a kidney stone, he had colic, he had sinusitis. On the other hand, prices for Georgia's paintings are rising. The Boston Museum of Arts acquired a collection of his photographs, and that was the first time a major museum included photographs in its permanent collection. He donated them so he could have some control over what was happening to them. And of course, she paints her first large-scale picture, Petunia number 2, first exhibited in 1925. It's down in the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. And she magnifies, as we know, the flower's form to emphasize its shape and color. So she says, and you've heard this before, I'm sure, but it's important to include it, nobody really sees a flower, really, it's so small. We have in time, and it takes time. So I said to myself, I'll paint what I see, what the flower is to me, but I'll paint it big, and they will be surprised into taking time to look at it. Mid-November 1925, the two of them move into the Shelton Hotel on Lexington Avenue between 48th and 49th, living first on the 12th floor and then on other floors, and then they move to 405 East 54th. He opens a new gallery. He called it the Intimate Gallery. It was referred by Stieglitz as the Room because it was very small. That's his third place. And she paints the great tree and black iris. And yes, I see what's on the bottom. Let me show you the, we could do this. So this is the, at the dinner party at Judy Chicago's. Now, I'll show you the other pictures, but just because that's sort of in our face here. She has the last place setting at the dinner party. Her plate has the most height, let's get in closer to it. The most height, signifying her artistic liberation and her success as a female artist. The imagery on the plate incorporates the forms she used in her flower paintings, like the black iris at the center core. So Judy Chicago pays tribute to both O'Keeffe's originality and the imagery of her paintings, and she acknowledges the influence O'Keeffe had on later feminist artists, claiming her work as, quote, pivotal in the development of an authentically female iconography. Now on the runners of, I hope you've all seen this, it's a wonderful exhibit. The airbrush colors corresponding to the plate's palette. Judy Chicago chose those colors to represent fine art painting and O'Keeffe's participation in that tradition. A piece of raw Belgian linen, which is used for art canvases, is attached to cherry wood stretcher bars. And on the front, the first initial, I don't know if we can get, first initial of George's name is done in a style like the skulls that we haven't seen yet, of the American West. So let's just enjoy the pictures. Look at the shading again, the wonderful color palette that she's included there, and the sinuous lines of her and the black iris from 1926. So now they're living at the Shelton. And she goes outside one day and she paints the Shelton with sunspots. And she said it was an optical illusion, the bite out of one side of the building by the sun. And she was fascinated by its soaring height. And I love, this is the Radiator building. I'm putting together or refixing my presentation on Art Deco. And this picture fits in so beautifully with the Art Deco motif. So this is the Radiator building from 27, I'm sorry. Now, who's Dorothy Norman? Well, 1927, she comes to the gallery and she's looking at the works of John Marin. And she, once again, Stieglitz becomes infatuated with a much younger woman. Dorothy volunteers for all the mundane tasks of the gallery, and soon she finds she's returning Stieglitz's attention. Stieglitz is 64, she's 22, she's married, she has one child, she gets pregnant, but not by Stieglitz. But she comes and she goes in the gallery and they become, quote, very close. Now she studies photography with him a bit, watches what he does, and he gives her advice. And I just want to say that later, now after his passing, she actually photographs people like Indira Gandhi, Nehru, Einstein, Elia Kazan, Marcel Duchamp. So she becomes a good photographer. But anyway, this is his picture. So this is from 1930, very demure, isn't it? But then we have this one. Now, this one always strikes me. This is 32. What's he including? The hands, which was something that was so special between him and Georgia. So she was let's go back to she was an adventurous young woman from Philadelphia. She had moved to New York. And when the Intimate Gallery was forced to close down in 1929, it was Dorothy who became the driving force in making arrangements for a new exhibition space. She was indispensable to Stieglitz as a confidant and for a time as a lover. She was profoundly affected when he died in 1946. She worked to preserve his legacy. She wrote a book about him in 1960, and she founded the Alfred Stieglitz Center at the Philadelphia Museum of Art in 1968. So first of all, she must have had money, right? So Georgia had been dealing with bouts of illness, and she would go up to Lake George, kind of recuperate. She knew of her husband's interest in Dorothy Norman, but she thought it was just a phase. She had struggled with artistic roadblocks for a while, and Mabel Dodge, who is now in New York, Mabel Dodge spent time in Paris around the time, some of the time of Gertrude Stein. When she came over to New York, she held salons, as Gertrude had over in Paris. So Mabel Dodge invites her to come to Santa Fe, where Mabel goes, and Mabel marries Tony Lujan, a Native American down there. So she invites Georgia to go down with her, and Stieglitz takes the time to photograph Dorothy Norman. But some paintings that Georgia is making. So the first retrospective is done at the Brooklyn Museum in 1927. What she did with flowers in the 20s, she now combines the principles that she learned with Arthur Wesley Dow, and she would continue with that. So we have, I went back and put titles and make sure there were titles on everything. So Yellow Calla from 1926, you can see the stamen, the pistil, and the gorgeous color. Look at this. Yellow pistils, just striking. And, you know, everything about this, if you take the white of the flower, you have to look behind it and see that she's backed it with this yellow pink, and then just a bit of background to offset it. And also down here, just a green leaf, but what a difference it makes in her presentation. And the same thing here, calla lily on gray. So we have Oriental Poppies down at the bottom, which is from 1928. It's 30 by 40, so it's a very large picture. I'm going to get in close because what I want to tell you is that the shading is velvety, and the color, it looks like black, doesn't it, on the orange, but it's purple. So you get that all of, again, the shadings of the orange, very light here to make sure that it pops, and then the purple. Grapes, I feel like you could eat them right off the plate. And the Black Cross. So the Black Cross, this one picture is at the Art Institute of Chicago. What she said is, I saw crosses so often and often in unexpected places, like a thin, dark veil of the Catholic Church spread over the New Mexico landscape. Now, what this reminds me of is the Calvaries that Gauguin painted in Brittany, where he would notice that there were statues that were placed along the landscape, and people would stop and pray. And he painted a number of them. And this, Georgia did the same thing. And again, you see, this is where she says, behind the hills that go on and on, it was like looking at 2 miles of gray elephants. So that's where that quote comes in. So then we get this. Now, this is a poignant picture. She realizes that he's spending a lot of time with Dorothy Norman, and she sends him this, which is a photograph of Georgia and Alfred. And at the bottom here, it says, I have destroyed 300 prints today and much more literature. I haven't the heart to destroy this. Give it to the part that no one else can see, Georgia, ever see. So this is Rancho Church, and this is from 1929. Her fascination with indigenous architecture, same appreciation with the organic relationship that she had. We saw that picture of my shanty where she was painting. So the architecture she pays attention to. This is the original church. It was founded in 1710, dedicated to St. Francis of Assisi, and it's adobe. So it needs to be redone every year. So this is her painting. This one is 24 by 36, a good size. And it's compared sometimes with Van Gogh's old church tower at Noyen from 85. Not that she was copying it all, but more the structure and the fact that to show the solidity of the architecture. Now she decides she's going to paint 6 canvases that depict Jack in the pulpit. And she says, the series starts with this one, and it goes on, and it becomes more and more abstract as you go through. So I'm only showing you 4 of them, but you can see how it progresses. And finally, she just gets the Jack, and she tells you all about it. I hate not to see them up close. You can see almost see her brush strokes in this, how she forms it. This when she does it like this, like number 1, it could be a botanist's model. But when she gets to her stylized versions, things get more colorful and more abstract, obviously. So these are pictures from New York. Now, she's coming back and forth at this point, spending a lot of time in the Southwest, coming back to Stieglitz. And he takes this photograph. This is from the window at the Shelton. She does this one. And this one is, I believe, at MoMA. Let me just, the more I know about them, I don't turn the pages, and then I have to go back when I want to find it. So this is at the Metropolitan. And I think of people she's looking from her window at the Shelton across the East River to Long Island City. If she saw Long Island City today with its upward mobility and its renaissance and all of the great buildings that are there, she would be really surprised. I worked for I was supposed to introduce myself in the beginning. My apologies. I'll do a 2-minute thing. My last name is Dono, and so it's Mary Dono. I worked for the Department of Education for about 25 years in New York City. I started as a paraprofessional. I enjoyed teaching, went on to administration, and retired as a principal. And the Long Island City is part of District 30. So we had one of the very new schools when toward the end of my career, right about here. So Georgia would have been impressed. I retired in 2007 and picked up doing this a few years later. So I've been doing this art for about 10 years. I do a lot with the Queen's Libraries, with Great Neck Cumberland, and with a lot of individual groups like the Malloy Mill 1 and Mill 2 groups, and some of the libraries on Long Island as well. Enough about me. So these are the skulls, and she would sometimes take the skull. So this is Horse's Skull on Blue, one of the earlier ones from 1930. She'd take the skull back to New York. And the way you know it is that Alfred has memorialized it with her hands around it. Now, he didn't leave New York. He went up as far as Lake George, and he didn't want to travel at all. He, stayed there. So she begins this series of skulls in 1930. And you have cow skull red with calico. This one is calico roses. This is the red, white, and blue. Now, those roses are really memento mori. They signify often, they're put on as memorials to the dead. So it's interesting that she includes them, not that the animal at this point is dead. This would be the red, white, and blue Americana. And she decorates some of them with these artificial roses. She settles permanently in New Mexico in 1949, and she lives there until her death in 1986. So the red, white, and blue, you have the stripes on either side, and it's her great American painting. These are kind of new to it. I came across these Kachina paintings. She's did these in 1931, 29, 31. They're very different from what we usually see. She did them when she was down in New Mexico. She bought a car. She learned to drive. She went to Pueblo Indian dances. She became enchanted with the crosses, the adobe buildings, the bones, and then the paintings of these Kachina dolls. So she made 16 of these depictions between 1931 and 1942, and they range in height from 10 to 24 inches. And then this one down at the bottom is titled A China Cock from 1929, and it's an oil on canvas. So it doesn't really fit in with these, but it's, nice to have something fresh added to any presentation that you give. So let's take her to Abiquiu. So we have near Abiquiu in 1930, and the clamshell. Here she is on the back of the motorcycle. This is a fellow named Maurice Grosser, Grosser. So she's hitching a ride. Now she's taken the clamshell and she's made, it's just a clamshell until Georgia gets a hold of it. And then she makes this absolutely beautiful picture of it, 24 by 36 at the Metropolitan, color modulation in its finest. The soft salmon color here, sort of. And we have Jimson Weed White Flower, and I bring you that because it sold for $44 million. It's an amazing picture. It was auctioned, it sold in 2014 for that amount of money, and 48 by 40 inches. We have Ram's Head and White Hollyhock Hills and Summer Days, and we're moving into the 30s here. And again, you have the white rose. She depicts the hills just as a basis for bringing us up into the clouds with the, and a lot more from her color palette, so to speak there. Now, Stieglitz gives his collection to the Metropolitan, and Georgia looks for other accommodations in New Mexico. She goes from one ranch to the other until she settles. Different things happen. Somebody's in the place that she usually goes to. And I want to make sure we get to the end of the picture. So I'm going to move us. Now he's still photographing. So he's up at Poplars, Lake George. And again, Poplars reminds me, Monet did wonderful poplar pictures. This is a little bit different. These are rather sparse poplars, aren't they? And I always wonder, if anyone in the audience is familiar with this car. This is a Ford V8 from 1935 that he's photographed from the rear. But here she is. So she gets a gig to go to to Hawaii from the pineapple, from Dole pineapple. I just want to fill a little background. 1938, she's awarded an honorary degree from the College of William and Mary. And in 1939, she's named by a committee for the World's Fair here in New York as one of the 12 most outstanding women in the previous 50 years. Alfred is 72. He comes back and he does those photographs that we just saw. And he's really considered the godfather of modern photography. I don't want to take anything away from him. We moved quickly from him to Georgia, and I feel sometimes he gets lost, but he really played such a pivotal point in there. So here she is in Hawaii. Now in 1938, Alfred suffers a serious heart attack, and he ends up with Dorothy Norman managing the gallery. The Dole Pineapple Company pays Georgia to travel to Hawaii in 1939. And what she decides, she's supposed to paint something that they can use in their advertisements. So instead of painting the whole pineapple, she paints the bud. And it definitely becomes part of their advertisement. She also does this beautiful heliconia crab claw. And I'm sorry, this is White Lotus, forgive me. I combined them. So this is the heliconia, the crab claw. And the red and green, of course, offsets it. Opposite sides of the color wheel makes the color so sharp and strong. And you get your White Lotus up there. Some of her paintings from the late 39 and 40. Again, a little stylized. And this one too is new to it, the Red Hills and Bones. I just thought when I came across this, I said, I have to put this in. It's absolutely, really, isn't that a gorgeous picture? This is from 1941. It's at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. A large canvas among her most ambitious evocations of this arid country. She had purchased her home in Ghost Ranch the preceding year, and she said it was the bones strangely more living than the animals walking around. So you can see the animal bones, the bleached vertebrae. From the white place and the black place, places that she loved to go and paint. And that takes us again, just don't want you to miss the detail. Here's the bottom. This is the ground, and look at how these rocks come up, and this is the hills behind. And the black place, a little more stylized. And the pelvis, I believe that's the same bone, and she's painted it in two different directions. So she pelvis with a distance. And the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, I don't know if any of you got an opportunity to see at the Nassau Museum of Art a few exhibitions ago. This painting of the Brooklyn Bridge was there. So that summer of 1946, Stieglitz suffers his fatal heart attack. He remained in a coma long enough for her to get home. When she walks into the hospital room, who's there? Dorothy Norman. Georgia throws her out, and she tells her that not to have anything to do with the studio any longer. There's a simple funeral held, only 20 friends and acquaintances in attendance. Stieglitz is cremated, and his ashes are taken up to Lake George. The day after the funeral, O'Keeffe calls Gloria Norman, and she just demands absolute control of the American place. She told Norman to clear out everything. So now she's ready to go, to leave New York permanently, and we get the Brooklyn Bridge pictures. This is an untitled. I put it in because it's sold at Christie's for $43,000, just this little sketch, 10 by 7. Few more last ones. This is Pinions with Cedar, and I show it because it has an Asian sense to it. Very much lighter and airier and different from what we've seen before. And of course, it's 1956 here. These are the costumes, just a selection that was shown down at the Brooklyn Museum. Here she is. This is I want to tell you who the photograph is with, and I can't think of his name right now, but you can see the type of clothing that she wore. Hopefully, maybe you even saw that exhibit. Some of her later pictures, she did about 1 million of these with the, I'm exaggerating, with these swirls. It's as though the roads are leading up to her place, but in different colors and in different forms, and small lavender and gray hills. This is her largest picture. This is Sky Above the Clouds 4. It's 8 feet by 24 feet. You see her here in Abiquiu, and she created this symbol for her ghost ranch. Now, Juan Hamilton was a young fellow who spent some time with her toward the end of her life, and they took a trip to Washington, and when they came back, she painted A Day with Juan Hamilton 2 from 1977. There's books written by her and about her, cookbooks. The faraway one, that picture it was made that we saw was made into a stamp, and this is the first day of issue. The book Georgia O'Keeffe became a bestseller. It was dated 1976. So that's take you to the end. There's little public information about her eye troubles or other physical problems that affected her dexterity as an artist. At the age of 84, she lost her central vision and retained only peripheral sight and irreversible eye degeneration. But she had trouble with her eyes the previous years. And she also had hearing loss and some blindness in the 80s that was hushed up. Now, she talks about Stieglitz, and she said, there was a constant grinding like the ocean. It was as if something hot, dark, and destructive were hitched to the highest, brightest star. For me, he was much more wonderful in his work than as a human being. Her friendship with Juan became more distant. He still cared for her. He made arrangements with the caretakers during his absence, and he wasn't there on March 6th in 1986 when 98-year-old Georgia O'Keeffe was taken to the hospital after she experienced difficulty breathing. She died later that day. Her ashes were scattered in the winds of New Mexico at Ghost Ranch. So I thank you for coming. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll do my best to answer any questions that you have. You're welcome to unmute yourself and share your thoughts.
You mentioned a little bit about their relationship. It was more of an artistic one, would you say, than a love match?
I would say it was more of an artistic one. I think he was very much infatuated with her at first. She was young, she was beautiful, I don't know that he ever fell out of love with her, but they went their own ways to find themselves. He found himself in his work, particularly. He really is an overachiever, somebody who must be involved in many things at once, and he did enjoy the younger women. So she was always loyal to him. And it's interesting to have that quote where she said she was, more attracted as an artist. But so, yeah, it was an interesting relationship. Artists are interesting. So, anyone else? Edie, you're muted if you wanted to say something. Yes, Barbara?
I was just wondering, I remember seeing the Judy Chicago, Georgia O'Keeffe exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum, but I don't remember when that was. I lived down the street from there. Do you know when that was?
I'm going to say maybe 3 years ago. Because it
No, there was an original one.
I don't know when the original one, that I don't know.
Okay.
Try to guess.
Okay.
That one I don't know. The Judy Chicago exhibit, though, goes back a number of years because it was in that's that whole dinner party.
Yeah.
And so I know you know. I'm just putting thoughts together. And then it was taken out. It was sent to other places, and now it's back permanently. But it's adapted a little bit from the way it was originally. So it's not that the table itself is intact. The floor is intact, but some of the surrounding exhibits are a little different from what I've seen them before and after. I'm sure you've seen them many times if you live nearby. But a wonderful exhibit, so.
Barbara, I think that was the early 70s, the Judy Chicago exhibit, the first time it was in New
Okay.
York.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was wondering if I don't have a date even on the,
On Wikipedia, it says 1979.
okay,
at the museum.
thank you. Well, I certainly thank you. I hope to see you again, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about Alfred Stieglitz and Georgia O'Keeffe.
Thank
Thank you,
you. I thought
Mary.
it was wonderful.
Great. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We appreciated it very much.
It was
I'm
very
glad you
good.
enjoyed me.
Mary, thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, you did a beautiful portrayal of the passionate artist in photography and painting. It really was. It was wonderful. Thank
thank
you.
you. And thank you for bringing me into this group. I appreciate it.
We'll invite you back in the spring.
Take care. I'm going to close this out and have a wonderful evening. Happy,
You
safe, healthy.
as well.